Oh.
Well, we are recording. That means it's time to begin. Welcome everybody to the Do Tell Story Swap. I want to thank Meg Brown and Katie Mangan, the chairs of our little organization, for always planning and being ready and willing to hold this event with us. Let's see, we have 11 people so far. I think the only thing for housekeeping that we need to do on Zoom at this point is just try to make sure you're muted when you're not talking. Because when you're not muted, we can hear the keyboard and we can hear all kinds of funny little squeaks and noises. As host, I may mute you if you aren't muted, and please don't take that personally. It's just part of the kind of the Zoom etiquette, the Zoom protocol. So it's nothing personal. We will probably have a break around 8 o'clock. That'll be a 5-minute bathroom break, and then when we come back, we will introduce ourselves, and there's usually a seasonal prompt, and I do believe we have one for today. So we'll go around and introduce ourselves and ask and answer a question that I will give to you right at around 8 o'clock. So let's see, are there any other things we need to do before we begin? We'll have some announcements around 8 o'clock as well. I see Genevieve just joined us. Hello, Genevieve. Welcome. We're glad to see you. And you are our 12th person to join the swap tonight. So it,
I like that.
Yeah, it's a nice, good number. And you're just in time to hear the first story. So our first teller is going to be Sharon. And please welcome her to the Do Tell stage. Thank you, Sharon. Sharon Elwell.
This one is an experiment. We're seeing whether I can use visual aids. So here comes one. Now, I don't know if you can see her. Yeah, okay. Robin takes her responsibilities as a citizen very seriously. For one thing, the tiny forest community where she lives is a true democracy. So every creature, down to the smallest bug, has one vote. Robin knows that her vote is just as important as anyone else's and might be pivotal. So she's very thoughtful in her selection. But the problem that she's having this year is that none of the candidates for mayor look very good to her. Beaver has put himself forward as the candidate of progress and development. Robin's not that sure that that unsightly pile of wood in the water is really progress. And last year, when her nest fell right into the water after she had busily added the very last twig, she decided that he's not the candidate for her. Coyote calls himself the candidate of cooperation, and he cooperates. That's why we have coy dogs and coy wolves and coy everything else you can think of. And he hunts together with Badger, because Badger can't run very well with those stubby little legs, and Coyote doesn't dig very well. But together, they are a lethal machine. Robin isn't sure that someone who eats their constituents is the kind of leader she really wants. She's thinking of someone noble, like this one. But he says, I'm afraid I can't. And she says, why not? I just told you I'm afraid. I am programmed to be afraid. Every change of light, scent, atmosphere, motion, I run away. I'm just not the leadership type. And I'm sorry. I know that insurance company uses me as their model of steadfastness and strength, but that's pure hype. I'm really, really not the right guy. Well, I am, says Chipmunk, and I'll tell you why. Who brings the picnic tables into the forest? Who brings the potty into the forest? That's human beings that do that. And why do human beings come to the forest? They don't come to take selfies with beaver or coyote. They come to see me, the most adorable and most photographed of any influencer. I have more power over what happens in this forest than anyone else. And if you think it's easy stuffing your cheeks with peanut after peanut and smiling for photo after photo, you're wrong. I'm the leader. I think you should consider me, said Bear. I'm the one that keeps us safe. You see these claws? The markings that I make on top of the trees keep out all strangers, all speakers of other languages, all foreign types. Just because I am powerful, I'm your first line of defense. But Robin kind of likes the songs and other things that she learns from people who come from different places in the forest. I don't think Bear's the one for her. And then came Owl, and he said, I am the leader for you because I understand you. I am a predator. I know what it's like to fly all night searching for something to eat. But I am also prey, and I know what it's like to hide in the hole in the tree and try to protect my owlets from whoever's going by. I understand how each of you feels, and I am the perfect leader. Well, Robin is just about to cast her vote when. And she looked and said, I can't believe he's putting himself forward. Who would vote for him? And then Skunk turned his back on the group and said, is there anybody here who would choose to vote against me? And not even Robin had the courage to open her beak, which goes to show that even in a true democracy, sometimes the voters get skunked.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much. And I, today with the ballot that I was filling out with all 40 of those candidates who are the replacement voters, oh my goodness. You painted a much clearer picture, I think, than the one that I was faced with. Let's see, we have somebody entering called assistant host. Well, Sharon, thank you so much, and it's timely. Today was our voting day. I hope everybody got a vote in one way or the other, whether by mail or by going to the poll. Well, we are so lucky to have Lori with us, who is going to tell the next story. Please welcome Lori Reum.
This story is called Penny Predicament. Many of you know that I am a longtime penny and litter picker-upper, but when COVID began, I was kind of not wanting to risk picking up those found coins. And so I would just make tally marks instead. Like I came home from a walk, I saw 3 pennies today, and I just mark it in my little accounting book because I like to keep track of how much I've collected for fun. Well, last year in March, when the shelter in place was still pretty new, out on one of my walks, I came across this whole little puddle of pennies. It was right outside of a driver's door on the street. And I thought, they just dumped them. They didn't want to use them. And it was almost like somebody dumping out a bunch of cigarette butts, But I looked at them and they were all nice and shiny, and they were near each other. And I counted, there were 16 pennies. It's like, wow, that's a lot of pennies. Just think, usually I pick one at a time. That's a lot of squatting and bending. but I didn't want to touch them. And so I went home. That was early in the afternoon. Well, I kind of thought about those pennies and I just thought, that's such an opportunity. When else have I found this many in one place? So, everybody was out home all of a sudden. We had to stay home. So people are out walking, riding their bicycles, doing business calls out on the street. Everybody was out walking because we couldn't really drive anywhere or go to work or school. So I thought, it's almost 5 hours later. I'm going to take this walk. I'm not going to count on seeing those pennies. Just in case, I brought along my gloves and an envelope. And when I came upon the scene, there they were. The whole puddle of pennies was still there. It was like, wow, jackpot. So of course I picked them up. Somebody had to do it. So as time went on, we were so nervous at first about touching things and germs and not knowing how long the contact would last. But over time now, I've gotten used to just picking up pennies and quarters and nickels when I find them and putting them in my pocket. And my routine is to come home and immediately put them in the kitchen sink where there's a bucket collecting water because of the drought. And then later I take the water and put it out on the flowers. And then at some point I just kind of rinse them off and put them on a little towel to dry. And then my routine is to put them on my dresser. So when I go to bed at night, I look at the dresser and I go, oh, good, there's 3 pennies or 2 quarters or whatever I found. And then I put it in my little journal that I tally up what I found. Well, I collect pennies and there's so many of them that, I fill up these rolls from the bank often. And when I get to 50, I get them ready to take in and change them for quarters, which I use at the farmer's market. I mean, truly, who even drops coins anymore? Who uses coins? Everybody's supposed to use credit cards and non-cash payment, but I still find coins wherever I go. People just have holy pockets or don't care. So I got to 49 cents and then I had a dry spell and I walk every day once or twice and I'm usually, home and walking in my neighborhood. And it's amazing to me that even though I walk every day the same basic routes, I usually find a penny or two. There's raining pennies from heaven or something. So I got to 49 cents and I was stuck. I just needed one more penny to fill up the coin thing. And it's like, what is urgency, right? It's like, at some point I'll find the penny. But I was starting to get a little annoyed that I just needed one more penny. So I walked and walked and walked and like a week or two went by and I finally found the one remaining penny and I felt vindicated. So I get home, do the usual plunk in the bucket. And that night I went to bed and I was kind of reliving my day and thinking, oh, yay, I found that penny. And I looked on my dresser and it's not there. I'm like, where is that penny? I'm so good about this routine. And then as I tried to fall asleep, I realized the water had gotten kind of cloudy. I'd rinsed some potatoes and some other things in it. And I hadn't seen the penny when I dumped the water and, hurled it into the garden. So it's like, brat, I threw away. That's what you get for money laundering, right? so the next morning I go out to the garden and I'm like, okay, I'm going to find that penny. It's just a matter of principle at this point. I looked and looked, I couldn't find it. I still haven't found that penny. I don't know where it is. I mean, I don't think the snails would go off with it, but it's still somewhere in that garden. So eventually I will find that 50th penny. And of course, then it all starts over again. But those are some predicaments that happened during the pandemic with my penny collection. That's it.
You slipped in a line about money laundering in there that I have to highlight. That was fantastic. Lori, always so clever and so heartfelt and lovable. I wonder if do you think someone ever leaves you pennies on purpose? They know you do this.
I wonder. I mean, a lot of people do have video cameras. It's like, oh, let's see if she'll fall for it. Maybe she'll pick it up again.
I was thinking maybe they adore you and want to make you happy.
Who knows? Who knows?
Right. Very good. Well, thank you so much for your story, Lori. And our next teller. Wow, we are in for a treat, everybody. Please welcome to the stage. And I'm looking through, where is Mary? We have There we go. Please welcome to the stage, Mary.
There you go, Mama. Okay, fine. And I'm so happy to see all of you and have you listen to another one of my traditional stories. This one is called The Three Sillies. Once there was a young man who was about to marry a very pretty girl. It was a good thing she was pretty because she really didn't have a brain in her head. They were all eating dinner. She and her family were eating dinner when they ran out of wine. And so the mother said to her daughter, "Run downstairs, darling, to the wine cellar and bring us another bottle." Well, the girl went, but she didn't come back. And she didn't come back. So finally the mother said, I wonder what she's up to. So she went off in search of her daughter. And they waited and they waited, and she didn't come back. Finally, the father said, they must be chatting. So he got up and left, and he didn't come back. So finally, the prospective groom said, well, I better check to see what's going on. So he went down to the wine cellar, and here were the three of them crying. Oh dear, what are we going to do? Well, that would be so awful. And he said, what's the matter? So his prospective bride pointed to the ceiling, and there in one of the joists, someone had stuck an axe. Apparently had gotten finished, but didn't want to carry it and the wine up too, and had just taken the axe and into the ceiling. She said, look at, there's that axe, and it might fall out, and we might get married, and we'd have a son, and we'd be all eating dinner, and you'd say to him, go downstairs and get another bottle of wine, dear. And he would, and that axe would jar loose and fall on his head and kill him. And wouldn't that be awful? And they all started bawling again. So the groom said, don't be ridiculous. And with that, he reached up and took the axe out of the joist and said, I have never heard of anything so silly in all my life. I have decided you are the silliest people I have ever met, and I'm not at all sure I want to marry into a silly family like this. So I'll tell you what I'll do. I'm going to finish my dinner, and then I'm going to leave, and I'm going to go traveling around the county. And if I can find two more people who are as silly as you, I'll come back and marry your daughter. So they agreed, and that's what he did. After dinner, he started walking around the county, and the next day he found a man who was trying to get his arms around the stomach of his cow. Well, now a cow can be a fairly large animal in the stomach. And so he said, what are you trying to do? And the man said, I'm trying to carry the cow up onto the flat roof of the house where the sod is growing very nice grass. And I think she would like to have some fresh grass. But I just can't seem to find any way to pick her up and carry her up the ladder. Oh, don't be so silly, said the groom. Go up the ladder yourself and cut the grass off and throw it down to the cow, and it would be no problem whatsoever. Oh my, said the man, I never thought of that. So the groom patted him on the shoulder and went on down the road. And he didn't find anybody else who was so silly until finally, in the end, it got dark. And there he met 5 men all walking down the street, and each one was carrying something. One had a rake, one had a hoe, one had a piece of rope, and I don't even know what the other two had. So he said to them, "What in the world are you doing with all those utensils?" And they said, "Oh, it's the moon. The moon has fallen into the village pond, and we can't get it out. And we thought if we use some of these tools, we might be able to get it out so it would go back up into the sky and do its usual night's travels." And the man went with them and looked, and sure enough, there in the village pond was the reflection of the moon. And they all started hoeing and raking and everything else. And the man's groom said to them, "But that's not the real moon. Look up there in the sky. See, there it is. It's not in the pond." And they said, "Oh, no, that what you're looking at is the hole that the moon left when it fell into our pond. And we have to get it out so we can put it back in the sky and it can go on its night's travels." And the young groom said, "My word, I have never met anyone as silly as you three. So that makes it fine for me to marry even a silly woman." So he turned on his heel and went back to the bride's home and said, "I guess you aren't the only silly people in this world."
Thank you, Mary. That was so wonderful. Hoeing on the lake. That is really a funny image. Hoeing and raking at the lake. I love that. Kind of reminded me a little bit of social media too. Like there's all these little different echo chambers where people just tell each other, what they want to hear, basically. That was a very meaningful folk tale to our present time as well. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed that. And Katie, if I'm not mistaken, I'm the next teller, is that right? And I have asked for a little bit of extra time, everyone, so don't be too alarmed. I think this is a between 10 and 12 minutes. It's something I'm working on for a fundraiser for an organization that helps students. So this was my first week as a high school teacher, and I found myself on a retreat with 60 ninth graders. We had gone to a ropes course, and then we had come to this retreat center where we made dinner and got ready to go to bed. The boys were in one bunk room, the girls were across the hall in the other, and I was in a bedroom with the only other teacher chaperone, whose name was Mike Peller. He was a math teacher. All I knew about Mike was that he had been a brilliant student of mathematics. He had just graduated from Harvard. But over the course of the day, he seemed to be undergoing some kind of transformation. He had donned a pair of sunglasses, shades. He had kicked off his shoes and spent the entire afternoon barefoot. And now he was tossing and turning and cursing about how noisy the students were, that they couldn't go to sleep. "I can't relax," he kept shouting. And finally, he bolted up out of the bed, through the doors into the boys' bunk room, where he began to berate them belligerently. "In case you didn't know it," he began, "you're all being graded on this retreat. You're going to get a plus, check, or minus, And that's going to go right next to the math grade I give you and the humanities grade that Mr. Spars gives you. And right now, you're all getting minuses, he bellowed. I heard stammering and muttering. I knew who that was. He was not only my student, he was also my advisee. His name was Brian. Now, he had brought his calculator. Every student had been issued a calculator by the school, but he was the only one who had brought his. He brought the manual, and he had been completely absorbed in discovering all the different capacities this calculator had for graphing and performing functions. He had given updates about the estimated time of arrival based on the rate, time, and distance of the bus. And of course, a group of cool boys had snatched the calculator when he hadn't been looking. Well, since the calculator had been a problem, we had taken it away from him. Well, it turned out the calculator wasn't the only thing he was obsessed with. This talk of grades really got him going. He wanted to know what the standards were. He wanted to know how he could raise his minus to a plus. And that was when Mr. Peller turned to him and shouted, "Brian, you're getting a 0. There was more stammering and muttering. "Brian, double 0. And Mr. Peller turned and marched down the hallway. I met him at the door, but he walked right past me, stripping off his long sleeve shirt, throwing it over my head onto the bed. He continued down the hall and blasted right through the main doors. He headed outside for the forest. All I heard was, "I need to go somewhere where I can relax," he shouted. Well, at first, the bedroom was silent. Nobody said anything. Then I could hear whispering. And then, of course, someone shouted, "Brian, double 0." And there was laughter. And then there was a tapping at my door. It was Brian. He was concerned about his grade. What did that mean, that he was getting a double 0? Did it mean he was getting a 0 on this retreat and next year's retreat? "Brian, Brian," I said, "I'm going to let you in on a little secret. You're not actually being graded." He looked at me full of mistrust. I said, "No, Mr. Peller was just bluffing." As I looked at him, I thought about myself a little bit. I could see some of myself in Brian. I had been obsessed with keys when I was an elementary school student, and I had followed the janitor around. In middle school, I had been obsessed with pocket knives to the point where I remember a teacher found me with one and confiscated it, and I had never gotten it back. I had also been obsessed with grades, and I spent a very long, traumatic year in the 9th grade. And I wonder if that's how and why I became a 9th grade teacher. Well, to build trust with Ryan, I reached in my bag and I pulled out his calculator and I handed it to him. Brian's face brightened immediately. I told him, "Now, Brian, go back, have fun, make friends, and don't let them steal your calculator." To my dismay, when he returned to the bunk room, he made a series of very public calculations about how many hours, minutes, and seconds until breakfast. And one boy shouted, "Brian, 0." And that's when he said, "Hey, everybody, Mr. Spars told me we're not actually being graded." "Brian, double 0, they shouted, and there was laughter. It wasn't long before there was another tapping at my door. "Brian, did they already take your calculator?" I asked. But to my surprise, it wasn't Brian. It was Chess, one of the cool boys. He had a stylish shock of hair, combed strategically over one of his bottle green eyes. "What can I do for you, Chess?" I asked. "Well, I'm probably gonna die," he said. "Oh, come on, Chess. It couldn't be that bad." But then he pulled up his shirt. And at first, I didn't even know what I was looking at. There were blinking lights, wires, and there were tubes that were going into his body like he was some kind of cyborg. He explained to me he was a severe diabetic and that this was a computerized insulin drip system. Then he pointed at a menacing, flashing red light. This meant his battery was running low. He had about an hour of juice left, and then 2 hours before he would go into severe shock. "Well, Chess, are you here because you want me to help you put in your extra battery?" He lifted up that stylish shock of hair and fixed me with both bottle green eyes in total earnestness. He said, "I forgot my battery." "Well, how about one of these?" I said, grabbing my flashlight, but he held up his hand and he said, "This machine doesn't take regular batteries. It takes very special ones, cadmium SX3s. There's no way anyone could have one of these." This revealed a flaw in the school's planning. A bus had dropped us off. We had no transportation. Out in the middle of Occidental, about a 3-hour walk from the town, we didn't have any cell reception. So the only thing I could think of to do at this point was to walk out from the retreat center and try to get close enough to Occidental where we could get some cell reception and have his family and maybe an ambulance meet us. I went to tell Mr. Peller the plan. At the edge of the ancient redwood grove, I saw a puddle of clothing, a pair of pants, his t-shirt. He was presumably in the trees, possibly naked. "Mike," I shouted. At first, there was no answer. Then it was like the trees themselves were speaking. "Yes," came a disembodied voice. "He was really relaxing out there." I explained the situation, and after giving him all the details, the woods had one question: "What kind of battery is it?" "I don't know," I said, "some kind of SX something." The trees asked, "XS3?" And I said, "Yes, I think that's what it is." The mist was rising through the ferns, mingling with the scent of the redwood bark. And that's when the woods said, "That's the same as the school calculator." Same battery. I was already marching back and the woods were still speaking. Now leave it to the teenagers for there to be a crisis of life and death situation, for them to all fall asleep. I couldn't rouse anyone. I was stalking up and down the rows of the bunk beds, but then, bathed in a pool of moonlight, I saw it. The TI-50 calculator on a pillow. Next to it, purring gently in deep slumber, was Ryan. I wouldn't even have to awaken him. I reached for the calculator and began to slide it toward me. That was when he bolted up. "Aha!" he shouted and shone a flashlight right in my face. "Who's stealing my calculator this time?" And I could feel the broken trust on the other side of that light when he realized it was me. "Mr. Spars, you're stealing my calculator?" He had all this neck gear and retainers and orthodonture work going on, so it obstructed his speech. "No, Brian, no, I'm not stealing your calculator," I said. I need to use it." This had an interesting effect. Brian became very aroused. He leapt from the bed and began waking up all the other students. Okay, everybody, get up. We're making a calculation, an important calculation Mr. Spars has to make. No, 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 I said. We're not making a calculation. I need to use the batteries from your calculator. And I explained the situation. Now, what Brian should have done in front of all his peers is immediately say, yes, he can have my battery to save his life. That would have helped his social standing immensely. He also needed to understand that he had to help me out of this very dire situation. But instead, he began to whine and moan why Chess was one of the boys who had taken his calculator earlier. Why did everyone want his calculator and try to steal it from him? And couldn't I find someone else who had brought a calculator? Well, I got an idea, an awful, wonderful idea. I decided to appeal to a different side of Brian, his darker side. Brian, I said, you'll get a good grade if you give me your batteries. You said we weren't being graded, he snapped. And then I hissed with temptation. Oh, yes, you are being graded, Brian. And if you give me your batteries, you'll get a plus. I saw a smile form in the back glow of that flashlight, full of wonder at his own indulgent, audacious anticipation of this grade he was about to get. And then he asked, will I get a double plus? And so, for a second time, a grade that doesn't even exist was promised and never recorded. I got the battery, handed it to Chess, and he popped it into his rib cage, and the whole crisis was averted. I'm going to end there. Thank you very much. So I'm recovering a little bit, but I
Just
see
have to say
now-
that was amazing, and that was like
Oh.
14 minutes, just so you know.
Oh, that's better. At one point, this story, well, there's a version of it that's a lot longer. Let's just say that. It can be 30 minutes long. Very good. I think we have time for at least one more before the break. And so I'm going to welcome to our Do Tell stage. He goes by many different names. One I know of is Eddie Spaghetti, but he also revealed another one last week, and I'm gonna have to look back through my notes to see what it was. I'm disappointed I forgot it, but please welcome Ed Lewis.
Thank you. All right, we're ready? You can hear me? Okay. This is a folk tale that I heard in 1990 when I took a class at San Jose State with Bob Jenkins, who's this amazing storyteller. And I've revised it that was our assignment, to revise it into our own way. So here it goes. It was a typical market day in the ancient city of Fez, Morocco in 1643. Traders from Asia brought silks. Egyptian traders brought their gold and gem-studded jewelry. Venetian glass traders plied their wares, and the local Bedouin camel traders brought in camel products, meat, milk, and hides. It was a grand affair, and people came from all over the world for this market. As was his usual morning, at 5:30 a.m., Nashin woke up, donned his kaftan robe, and slid down the banister in his opulent mansion to the first floor, walked across his polished marble floors into the grand kitchen, where he prepared his favorite breakfast. Sweet, savory honey cakes, topped off with spiced mint tea. And after breakfast, he headed down into the cellar and out a secret door into an alleyway that he wandered till he got to the marketplace. He looked out at this grand affair and he spotted his first client. He was in this a richly dressed man at the silk vendor's booth. He started walking over towards the man, and then he picked up speed and smashed into the guy and knocked him down to the ground and picked him up, apologized. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. And then he moved on with 3 pouches of gold. For you see, Nazreen was the world's greatest pickpocket. For the next hour, he wandered this vast marketplace. And by that time, he had 9 pouches of gold. He was heading back home. He really didn't need the money, but he just loved the excitement and the intrigue of this adventure. And as he was walking, this young boy smashed into him and knocked him to the ground and took off. And Nazreen got up, the rude boy, muttering to himself, but he realized that he didn't have 3 of those pouches of gold anymore. Well, he saw the alleyway that the boy had went into, so he followed the boy, who was had a caftan with a big hood, down quietly down the alley, and the boy eventually stopped and in this doorway and took out some of the gold and was counting the gold, and Nazreen snuck up behind him, flipped back the caftan hood, pulled his hair down, and put a dagger right to his throat and said, "Those are my 3 bags of gold." And then he was puzzled that the person turned to him, and it wasn't a young boy, it was a woman. And the woman looked up at him and said, "Nazreen, I thought you were the greatest pickpocket in the world, but it seemed like you have been upstaged by a quite attractive and a charming woman." And, I think that maybe we could form a great union, and between the 2 of us, I've been observing you for 6 months, and I really picked up your techniques, and I might even be a little bit better than you. Well, he really liked what he saw in this intelligent and charming woman, and he said, "Well, if we do form this union, don't you think I at least ought to know your name?" And she said, "Yes, Nazreen. I have the name of my beloved grandmother, Asha." Well, for the next 6 months, they traveled to markets all over the world, Egypt, London, India, and they had a great time, and they amassed a fortune, and as to be expected, they fell in love and were wed. They were wed deep in the Sahara Desert with the Bedouin camel traders that they admired. Well, 9 months later, a little baby was born to the midwife. And they were so excited because they were going to train this baby to be an even greater pickpocket than them. However, when the baby came out with a nice cry like babies do, the midwife looked at the baby in puzzlement and maybe a little bit of sadness. And she handed the baby to Asha and said, I'm sorry, I don't know what's happening here. The baby's hand was clenched to her chest. And it was like frozen. It was almost like it was fused to the chest. And they couldn't move it. None of them could. Well, of course, this baby definitely wasn't going to be a pickpocket, but they didn't care. I mean, they loved the baby. They named her Faria. Now, they did have a lot of money, so they did travel to doctors, witches, backstreet beggars, anyone who had an idea how to solve the problem that this baby seemed to have. But to no avail, until they got to the town of Agar, just below the Taj Mahal in India. And there was a beggar alongside the street, and they gave the beggar some money. And the beggar said, with blind eyes, said, I understand you're looking for someone to help your baby. I know someone. If you follow me, I'll take you to her. And they followed the beggar down this dark alley, down to this small chamber. And as they entered the chamber, there was this huge Buddha statue. And below that was a shaman. She looked at them and said, sit next to me. They sat on both sides, and she took the baby. And then she took out a gold watch that was on a long chain, and she held that in front of the baby and started moving it back and forth. And the baby's eyes were tracking that gold chain. And all of a sudden, the shaman stopped the chain, and the baby's hand reached out for the watch and grabbed it and pulled it back to its chest. And everybody heard something hit the brass table that was below them. And it just happened to be the midwife's gold wedding ring. Thank you.
Ed, that was wonderful. Thank you. That market, I took students to that market in Fez where your story began. Oh my goodness, we were walking in there, and of course they had their backpacks unzipped and cameras hanging, and oh, we were not ready.
Yeah, I've been there too. It's an amazing market.
It's an incredible market.
800 years old at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it really is kind of the boundary between Europe and the Sahara Desert is right outside of that market. I think it's kind of the edge of the world, right? Or
it is, right?
They call it something like that because there's about 800 miles of desert that
to the east. Yeah, over towards Algeria. Yeah. Thank you.
What a wonderful story. Thank you. We've reached that point where it's time to take a little break. We're headed into the 8 o'clock hour. We still have Vicky, Katie, and Genevieve. Genevieve, I saw that you were interested in telling a story, so I just sort of threw you on the list. Does that sound okay, Genevieve? We're glad you're here. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, hi. It's a draft, but I'd love to tell it.
Yeah, I think that sounds great. And Katie, shall we just stick with that order? Okay, I saw a nod of approval.
Yes, I think that sounds good. So after the break, we'll do the check-in, and then it will be Vicky, myself, and Genevieve.
Yeah, and if anybody else is interested in telling a story, please put it in the chat or just give a shout, and we'll certainly hear you. So it is 7:50 now. Let's take a 5-minute break. I will be turning the recording off. I hope I remember to turn it back on. That's always kind of a risk you take when you do something like this. But feel free to leave your camera on. You can chat with people or turn it off and use the restroom, get a drink, whatever you need to do. And we'll start back up at 7:55 or thereabouts. Thank you, everyone. I resume. There we go. That's our announcement. I'm glad I remembered, so I don't have to start it midway through somebody's story. I think we will just begin with the prompts, and then there may be a couple announcements. Katie, do you have an announcement, or Meg?
Yes, I have a very, very important announcement. It's Meg's birthday today.
Yay! I thought that might be one.
So happy birthday, Meg.
Happy birthday.
Thank you, guys. Thanks
For
so
all
much.
you do.
Meg, do you want to
Thank you.
say your theory about September birthdays?
Oh, yes, that so many of my friends and acquaintances have September birthdays because of New Year's Eve celebrations. Yeah, what happens on New Year's Eve? New beginnings.
Well, I had a friend who always was told that it was Christmas cheer.
Oh, I think
the Christmas cheer babies.
I think you're right,
The
Genevieve.
holiday
I think
cheer.
Christmas is another one of those days where
The
that's
whole-
why there's so many August birthdays too, right?
Right. Just that whole thing, the holiday happenings.
Yeah, holiday happiness. Yeah, so
Happy
And I have
birthday, Meg.
another announcement is that on the 10th of October, Sharon Elwell is telling a spooky tale at the genre series. So hopefully we can all tune in and listen to Sharon.
Do we have anyone telling tomorrow night?
No, we don't, not from Do Tell.
Do you know what the subject is?
It's folk tales, isn't it, Ed?
Yeah, tomorrow is folk tales. I put the information in the chat, and we have 7 tellers, and then Marilyn McPhee is going to be the MC.
Right, thank you.
Sure.
I think that's it. Thank you.
Wonderful. So we were discussing what a good prompt would be. And I know nowadays back to school happens a little bit earlier than I was growing up. Certainly for me, it was always Labor Day weekend. That was the end of summer. And boy, was that a sad day. Every day for me when I was growing up. But now, my goodness, school sometimes starts, August 11. That was our start date this year. Pretty soon it's going to be the end of July. I'm not sure what is happening, but nonetheless, I still consider September to be the back to school month, and it should be the back to school month. And so our prompt today is for each and every one of us to share your back to school item. What was it you bought to get ready for the school year? And I'll give you an example. I always bought the same thing. It doesn't have to be something you bought every year, but every year I bought 4 peachy folders, one for each of my solid classes, math, science, history, and English. And I started to feel like that was good luck. I had to have those. It had to be a certain one with the sports figures on it. And I didn't feel ready unless I had that. And my name is Brandon, of course. And I live here in Santa Rosa. I'm a high school teacher. And I'm so glad to be a member of this group. I am going to turn over the stage to Katie, and she can share her back to school item.
I am Katie. I come from, Santa Rosa. This is going to really date me, but when I was going to school, we had inkwells on our desk for fountain pens. And of course, the school had really boring colored ink. So I would buy my own blue ink.
Great. And next, Ed, you need to remind the other name you shared 2 months ago. What was it? I know Eddie Spaghetti was one of your nicknames, but what was the other nickname?
Gosh, I've had a few over the years.
Okay.
Fast Eddie, of course, Fast Eddie.
Fast Eddie, I think that's what it was.
Big E Iron, because I was an iron worker for a while. No,
You could
You-
tell a
you
story about all your nicknames.
do you want me to go?
Yes.
Okay. So my parents moved me to Seattle for high school, and I hated the move. So this is what I would get at the beginning of every year for all my greaser buddies. I would go to the store and I would steal a carton of cigarettes and I'd pass out the packs of cigarettes to my buddies.
Oh my God.
All of us who hated school.
You probably had a lot of good friends. All right. And next we have Ellie Shiva. Ellie, I think you're
There.
muted. Yeah, there you
Um, I remember when I was a little girl, I don't remember buying anything special. My mom would take me to whatever nearest big city and like San Diego or Detroit or something, and get food, clothes, and I would hate it because you wouldn't even stop for a drink of water. You know, she hated shopping and I learned to hate shopping, and you know, but the thing I do remember is when I started beginners, which is called kindergarten other places, but it was called beginners. You lived near Ann Arbor, Michigan, and you had to buy your own school books. This is in the 40s.
Cool.
So we had this precious red school book that had beginning arithmetic. I don't know where that word ever left, but it's all math today. But we had this, book that was passed down to my brother. He was older, and then he passed it down to me because we had to buy them. So that I remember.
Wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And next we have Beth.
Hi, I'm Beth, and I live in Sebastopol and have been part of the Bay Area Storytelling Festival in the years when that was happening for a long, long time. So I'm glad to see you all. And my memory, the first thing that came was the smell of sharpened pencils. So, you know, sharpening the old fashioned kind, and that it's hard to find a good pencil sharpener. Mine had one we still have, of course it doesn't work anymore, the suction bottom. That was hard to keep it stuck on things. But yeah, I still love that smell. I guess it's the cedar that comes out. And I don't even know if people use pencils anymore. Mechanical pencils are not the same. So that's my school memory. And I'm a retired teacher. So lots of other things have come into play. It's always sad when I see one of the office supply stores go out of business, because I like to go in and just check all that stuff with my granddaughter. Now they're all grown up practically. Thank you.
Funny how that happens.
Great story you had. My goodness. Those chaperoning years. I'm so glad they're through.
Me too. Well, they're not. I'm glad this year is over. Let's put it that way. Yeah. Thank you. And next we have Vicky.
Hi, my name is Vicky. I'm from Sebastopol and retired. And I think one of my clearest memories is they used to have these red plastic pencil cases that had a pencil sharpener on one end and a slide rule that went up and down. And I never, ever learned how to use a slide rule. And I think one of my memories of school that comes back is the smell of chalk when you used to do the erasers. That smell, I don't think they use chalk anymore. So
No, they have awful whiteboard markers now. And then there's a lot of digital stuff too, smart boards. And next, let's hear from Gay. So good to see you, Gay.
Thank you. Okay, I'll mute myself. I would go, as when I was with my family of origin, I would go to the beach in the summertime and come back home for the school year. So it was kind of a hard transition to make to put shoes on. So I would have to make sure that I had shoes on to go to school because I never wear shoes the whole summer. And then I could take them off under my desk, but I had to start wearing shoes. And I have that association with going back to school.
Sounds like there's a bit of Tom Sawyer in you.
It wasn't a good feeling. It was confining.
And we have a dynamic duo, Meg and Mary.
Yeah, hi. I'm Meg Brown. I live in Forestville along with my mom, Mary. And you know, guys, it was the clothes. Now I have to say though that my mom sewed my clothes. So it wasn't exactly the shopping thing and everything else, but the one and the one that I remember she did not make. It was a red and black plaid jumper that I actually don't remember who gave it to me, but oh, I love that store-bought dress. And I think I wore it 3 days out of 5 every week until it just fell apart. But, you know, I always think about that dress when I'm thinking about going back to school and how I just loved it. It was store-bought. So what's yours, Mom?
Well, mine is not me, but you. Oh, yes. I remember your 8th grade graduation. And again, I wanted to get you a store-bought dress. And so we went to the mall and we went to this store. What you liked, I hated. What I liked, you hated. And finally you said to me, but Mom, why won't you make me a dress? I always liked what you made me, and that warmed my heart for months and months.
That is a beautiful story in itself.
Oh, I'm a storyteller.
I've heard. And next we have Genevieve.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for taking me off my mute. I love these prompts because they make me remember all sorts of things, and then it's hard to choose what.
Yes.
I love to see what pencil cases everybody else had. They always seem to have something more special than mine. And I went to school where it was very close to Fort Bliss, which is an Army base. So all the Army brats had access to incredible stuff. But one of the first things I bought for myself, I was so happy. There was a pen company called Lindy Pen, and they came out with pens in rainbow colors. I mean, in different colors, each pen. It was just extraordinary. Now everybody knows how to get colored pens, but back then it was black or blue ink and red ink, and sometimes green. So I bought an Aqua Lindy pen, and I took it to school, and I loved penmanship. And I was so proud when I wrote my name on the corner. I wrote OSJ, OSM. I went to a Catholic school. Oh, suffering Jesus, oh, sorrowful Mary.
No.
And I turned in my paper. Aqua is not allowed.
Oh.
I would have been happy to get a paper on Aqua. I'm sure I'm speaking for most of the teachers in here. Very good. Thank you, Genevieve. That was beautiful. I remember those special pens where they had different colors all in one pen too.
Oh yeah. No, this was just single pens, but
this was a single pen. Right. So Sharon, your back to school item.
It was about clothes for me too. And I grew up in Mountain View, so we went to San Francisco one year to buy my first going back to school dress. And it was so exciting because in those days, you didn't go into the city wearing pedal pushers or pants or ordinary clothing. If you were going to show up there, you wore gloves, you wore a dress, you dressed up because you were heading into the big city. And I felt like I was big girl when I bought my first dress there.
Thank you, Sharon. I remember dressing up when we were going to the city too. Every time we went in, even I had a dentist in the city and I had to dress up to go to my dentist. My mother made me. Very good. And next we have Vina.
Well, the interesting thing about the tiny little town that I grew up in of Las Molinas, up south of Red Bluff in the Sacramento Valley, is that the prunes were the major source of income for that little community, the prune farmers. And so they delayed high school until September 15th, September 20th, however long it took for the high school kids to gather in the prunes, to harvest the prunes. So that kind of, I love that. We were all out there picking and school itself had to wait. But the other thing about that tiny little town is kids did not bring any of their own supplies. There was no competition for the cool pencil box, the cool folders, none of that, because the school just supplied all that. And my grandmother would make me a dress for, excuse me, that first day of school. So I felt like I could show up in style.
Oh, that's nice. I miss, the school year being attached to the rhythms of the earth and not just, whatever's the most convenient. And next we have Lori.
I'm Lori, I live in Santa Rosa, and the first thing that came to mind was the pencil pouch it had a zipper and the sharpened #2 pencils and the gum eraser, and everything was so fresh and new, and the safety scissors and the wooden ruler and all that. But really clothes were what it was about, because I had 2 older sisters and almost everything I wore was hand-me-downs. And Mom, in her wisdom, knew what it meant to go get brand new clothes. So we would go and shop a couple different, shopping things over to, just the J.C. Penney's or something basic. But I have like a few tops, a couple skirts, and those Mary Jane shoes with the rubber soles and the ankle socks. And I just felt so new and fresh and original compared to wearing my older sister's stuff. So that was pretty special.
I bet those pencil cases are good for storing pennies.
Maybe that's when it all started. Who knows?
Now, Deb, are you there? Debbie, I think you're kind of, the Zoom name is Debbie Downer, right? There you are. Yay. What is your back to school item, Deb? You're muted.
My back to school item, hi,
Hi.
was a little wooden ruler that was given to all the kids in school by the Bodker Dairy. I lived in Redford Township, Michigan, and we were maybe 10 miles from the farms, but we also had a dairy that was in the edge of town, and they would let the school kids tour the dairy and learn how to make cottage cheese. And they gave the kids little wooden rulers, and I was looking around to see if I have it around the house, and I can't find it right now, but it was a little ruler, and on the back of it had girl, boy, how high and how many inches you were, what you were supposed to weigh, and I think they might have even had the times tables on it. But that was back quite a long time ago, early 1960s, so it's a bit of ways back. But I just remembering that how good it was to get to go shopping, and we would shop at the school. They would have a little what is smorgasbord of things you could choose, you could buy, and we had enough money that our parents could buy little things. And I bought my first
purse, I guess you could call it, my first pocket for my pencils as a kid in elementary school.
Oh,
And that might have some good memory for me, you know, how I continued in later in life, got into teaching children too,
yeah.
and enjoyed school enough and still do enjoy working with children.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'd love to see the ruler if you find it. That sounds neat. That's neat. You still have it.
Well, when you have enough, when you hoard enough things, you've hoarded good things. We have
So
6.
I believe the last person is Val. Can you turn your camera on, Val? Val? Let's see.
Maybe she's left. I mean, I just see her picture there, but that's all.
Oh, okay. Maybe, yeah, she's listening here and there, probably has it going. Wonderful. That was, Katie, did I hit everybody? Great. Very good. So that brings us to our next set of storytellers, our second set. So please welcome to the stage, Vicki.
Sunday morning, he would sit in the chair, his favorite chair, with maybe his third, fourth cup of coffee and the Sunday paper. And as he read, unfortunately, he'd start to get annoyed for that umpire, that idiot that didn't bunt when he should have. And then he'd move into the main news and get even more angry at the dishonesty and the cynicism and the poverty. And then he'd move on to the editorial section and get even angrier until he became like a furnace of anger.
Oh, I thought I'd come down and tell you I'm not welcome to Sandy this
Wrongs
morning.
that
She's going to
happened
be.
to people, and all of it just coming at him from the newspaper. And he rose in his anger like a giant bull, and with his horns, he would go after all the dishonest and the cynical and the cruel and the stupid and gore them and throw them over his head. And he rose up until he was tiny, sparkling lights of justice and truth and common sense. And all those lights shone against the blackness of human stupidity, the great constellation of Taurus. Sitting on the sofa across from him, she had Bach on the earbuds, and she had her tea, Japanese tea with chamomile and mint, and a little bit of verbena for calm and clarity and ease of digestion. And as the scent went up her nose and the beautiful music transformed her into an ethereal creature that rose like a cloud, higher, 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 until she was a beautiful cumulus cloud of compassion and brilliance. And the sun of divine light came behind her and made her shine even more brilliantly like polished silver, edged in gold. And her beautiful light would shine down on the dark world of human confusion, chaos, and pain. And she offered up her cup like a supplicant offering something to a beloved deity. And she sighed. And in between these two people was the dog. And the dog had to pee. And nobody was noticing that. So he got up and he walked over to the cloud and he heaved himself against her leg like a 50-pound sack of cement and sat down heavily with a big grunt. And then he turned those big pity eyes on her. Whoa, gotta pee, gotta pee, gotta pee. Nothing. She didn't even see him. He regrouped himself and stared out the window for a minute. And at that time, into the living room walked the cat. Binka, 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 tail straight up. Binka, 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 over to the little cat post, and up she went. Bink, 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 to the top platform, whirled around, threw herself down with her paws hanging over, and then she graced everybody with a quiet glance and then fell asleep. Well, the dog really had to go, and nobody was looking at the dog. So he heaved himself up again. He was not a young dog. And he waddled over right in front of the cloud, and he stuck his nose at her knee, and he looked up with laser unblinking eyes. Pee, 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 gotta pee, 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 pee. And then he did his deep grumbly whine. That did it. It dispersed the cloud. Oh, she said. Oh, the dog has to go outside. Oh, okay, come on. And out she went with the happy dog following behind her, out to the backyard. The bull hadn't noticed. He was trampling certain Texas lawmakers in the dust. And he was heaving ignorance and stupidity left and right and snorting with disgust, when all of a sudden he heard something that if you've ever owned a cat, you recognize. It's that kind of and sure enough, down falls a masterpiece of a fur ball right onto the carpet. And the cat looked down, very proud of herself. The stars fell from the sky. And all of a sudden it dawned on him that he needed to get paper towels. And he ran out, got the paper towels, ran back in, cleaned up the mess, grumbling about cats. And before he knew it, he was back in the kitchen, having washed his hands, picked up the dishes from breakfast from the table and put them in the sink, and staring out the window listlessly. About that time, she came back in with the dog and she said, "Oh, you know what? It's gorgeous out. Why don't we go for a walk around Spring Lake? Wouldn't that be fun? I want to do that." And he said, yeah, we haven't done that in a while. And let's do lunch on 4th Street. Oh, burgers, she said. Burgers, 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 yes. And they got so excited, they spun into their little orbits from kitchen table to kitchen sink, from bedroom to bathroom, from lost keys to found cell phone before they collided at the door, happily excited about this new morning adventure. They grabbed hands and walked out. Two beautiful, independent, celestial beings were brought together, their feet placed firmly on this beautiful earth by none other than our heroes, the cat and the dog.
Oh, Vicky, that was so wonderful. My goodness, your command of different genres too. You went from literary to folksy to purely animated, almost like a Tom and Jerry cartoon. That was just wonderful. And the line, they spun into their little orbits. That I could really, we have little orbits in my house. Let's just say that. Thank you for that. That was beautiful. That was absolutely wonderful. Wow. We have a really nice evening of stories, don't we? And to keep it going, who better than our co-chair, Katie Mangan.
Aye. A stranger in a strange land. This was a song that was co-written and sung by Leon Russell in the 1960s. And I really resonated with that song, not because I was a stranger in my own land of England. I was a stranger in my own family. I mean, they were so different from me. I couldn't see how I belonged. I mean, in one way we were different. They were meat lovers. They loved to eat meat. So their favorite meal would be what, lunch or dinner. Mine would be tea time. I was very surprised when I was about 11 years old and my mother showed me my birth certificate. And there it was in black and white. It was official. I belonged in that family. I even looked like them. It was during the 60s when anyone worth their salt was traveling. They were finding themselves. And I realized that if I traveled, when I returned, I might not have much in common with the friends I left behind. But I decided it was worth the risk. So in March of 1971, I left and went to live with my cousins in Ontario, Canada. Canada was a strange country, I thought. Beautiful, yes. I found it very beautiful when I traveled to the East Coast and the West Coast in the summer. And during my travels, I came across many draft dodgers. Of course, they didn't say where they were from. They were a sad and lost bunch of boys away from their families and their homeland. It was when November arrived, late November, and it was getting so cold and the snow was beginning to fall. I decided it was time to return to the relative warmth of England and of my family. After Christmas, my father told me to get a job. And so I went to London. And occasionally I would call home to tell him how I was progressing. And one evening I told him I'd been offered a job to become a nanny to a British family in Sydney, Australia. Well, of course, won't take that job. Australia's a dreadful place. But how did he know? I mean, I had been traveling in the London Underground and I'd seen posters of these people, very happy people, who were obviously emigrating to Australia, saying, in Australia, I will. I thought that was ungrammatical. Surely it should be, in Australia, I shall. Anyway, I lied to my dad. I told him I'd accepted the job, which I did the next day. But it was in the weeks before of my departure that I suffered debilitating fear. What had I done? I had committed to go to a strange land for a year, to a strange family. I didn't know anybody there. But as it turned out, it all went quite well. But Australia is a strange land. When I arrived, I thought it was an English-speaking country, but some of the Australians had such a broad accent, I couldn't understand them. And they, hearing my accent, called me a bloody Pom, prisoner of Her Majesty, harking back to the days when Australia was a penal colony. Australia is a land of contrasts. In the north, you have the beautiful, wet, green tropics. And in the center, you have the dry, arid land, the deserts. And then all around the coastland is the fertile land. And then, of course, you have the poisonous snakes and spiders and fish, the strange animals, the duck-billed platypus, the kangaroo. One of my first friends, Kathy, she was an Australian, and she wanted me to love her country as much as she did. And she would tell me, recite to me Australian poems when we were visiting her uncle in the country. And one of those poems was, I love a sunburnt country. And it talked about all the contrasts and of the droughts that went on for years or the flooding. But little by little, I became to love Australia. I wish I had been born Australian. And my parents came to visit on 2 occasions, the second being when George and I got married. But after 8 years, George's mother and uncle persuaded him it was time for him to return to California. And so we left. And when our 2 daughters were born, we decided that we should take them to visit their family in England so they would get to know the country where I grew up in. It was on one visit when Lucy was still quite young, and I can remember she looked at the clock and then she looked at my mother. Oh, Granny, look, it's almost 4 o'clock. It's time for tea. I was astonished. Lucy, you're an American. You have no business knowing about tea time. But apparently she did, because when she graduated from college, she became a British citizen. And she has been living there for the past 16 years. And her sister, Nikki, became a British citizen 6 years ago. And when I go to visit, the English, they look at me. They see the colors that I'm wearing and the clothes I'm wearing. And they hear my accent. Oh, where are you from? America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. One thing they are sure of, I'm not from England. I have become a stranger in my own land. Blessings, abundance, healing to you all.
Oh, Katie, you took us around the world in 6 minutes.
Thank you.
Fantastic. And I really enjoyed the history in there too, the sad and lost boys in Canada, the prisoners of Her Majesty, the Palms. I hadn't heard that before. Wow. And wow, the different languages, the way your accent has just been formed by where you've been, I suppose, all those different places.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Well, the last story on our list has the status of being our bedtime story. It's the last one we'll hear before we presumably all go off to sleep. I don't know, maybe some people stay up later than I do. But I'm very pleased to give our Do Tell stage to Genevieve. So glad you're here and telling a story. Welcome.
Always happy to be here. And I must tell Lori that I too am an inveterate penny collector, and that my mother-in-law once wrote a biographical story where she chose to talk about her daughter-in-law, yours truly, and she titled it, like the song Pennies from Heaven, her title was Jennies from Heaven. I was delighted. In the fell clutch of circumstance, in the fell clutch of COVID, the spiritual care volunteers like me were unable to go into the hospital we normally serve and do personal service. Instead, we'd make calls. In the fell clutch of circumstance is not something that I wrote. Those words, together with a very inspiring poem, were written in 1875 by William Ernest Henley, a British poet, Katie. I sometimes am able to talk to the same patient more than once, although rarely, because the patient roster changes, people come and go, and I don't always get the same people. But there was one patient that I was able to talk to 4 or 5 times in a period of the 29 days that he spent in hospital after contracting COVID. One of my favorite acts of service is to speak with patients who are Spanish speakers. And he was a Spanish speaker. The first time I talked to him, he could barely talk and was having difficulty breathing. In that case, I start by saying, I don't want to task you. Excuse me, I don't want to tax you. And I introduce myself, and I usually find a way to leave a little blessing of some sort. And one of my favorites is one in which one invokes the light of God, the love of God, the power of God surround you and enfold you and protect you and lift you up. But I translated into Spanish. It worked. The second week, I was delighted to find that he was also on my roster. he was able to speak a little bit more. I had chosen, with the possibility that I might talk to him, a fairly standard prayer from some prayer books that I had found in my mother's buffet when we cleaned out her house after she passed away. And I shared that with him. He expressed appreciation and told me that he had been seriously considering his life, his past, and where his future would take him. The third time I talked to him, I felt a close enough connection that I was able to do that kind of more Protestant kind of train of thought prayer, where you just kind of talk about all sorts of things and act rather chummy with God, actually. And I was able to speak words that seemed to have lifted him up. And then he told me that he had been reflecting on his past and how important life was and how short it is and how he was going to go back to everyone, his family, his friends, and make sure to make amends and make connections and live a life that truly acknowledged what a precious gift it was every day. The fourth time I saw the roster, I don't know why, but I said to him, I would like to share with you a poem that was of great inspiration to Nelson Mandela when he was at Robbins Prison after his work to try to eliminate apartheid from South Africa. He said, yes, I know who Mr. Mandela is. I had found a translation into Spanish, which I believe is a beautiful job done by Gregorio Davila. I will share with you the first stanza in English and then in Spanish. Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. En la noche que me envuelve negra como un pozo insondable, doy gracias al Dios que fuere por mi alma inconquistable. I heard the patient gasp, weep, make sounds of awe, anguish, inspiration, elation. I could not see it, but I could feel his reaction. I paused. Are you all right? Oh, yes. Yes, go on. I read the second stanza. I read the third stanza. We got to the final stanza. It matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. Ya no importa cuán estrecho haya sido el camino, ni cuántos castigos lleve a mi espalda. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. Soy el amo de mi destino. Soy el capitán de mi alma. When I finished the prayer, he said, Señora Jenny, Miss Jenny, I know well that poem. I don't know how of all the possible prayers and poems you could have selected, this is the poem that we have shared this day. I am beginning to see hope. I am beginning to see tomorrows. And I feel the power of an intense love that is indescribable. But Señora Jenny, let me tell you why this poem is so significant now. Señora Jenny, on the night before, the very evening when I ultimately ended up being brought into the emergency room, I was looking at a film called Invictus. Señora Jenny, it's the story of that Nelson Mandela you spoke to me about. He is my mentor. Señora Jenny, at the end of that film, he said, soy el capitán de mi alma. I am the captain of my soul. Gracias. Gracias, señora Jenny. Gracias, gracias, mi Dios. Thank you, Miss Jenny. Thank you, my God. The last time that I spoke to my patient, he had been moved out of the COVID floor onto a regular care floor. We had a lovely discussion. He spoke again to me of how much that moment had meant when we shared the powerful words of William Ernest Henley that over a century later would inspire Nelson Mandela in the liberating work that he did. And then a couple of decades later would give him something to hold on to as he sought one more breath, just one more breath. And he told me, Señora Jenny, I am told that I'm going to be discharged today. He flew on the wings of the spirit of Mandela, of Henley, and of all of those who've gone before us to conquer what had previously been unconquerable. Out of the night, wherever we be, black as the pit from pole to pole, thank we whatever gods may be for our unconquerable soul.
Oh, I'm speechless. And all I can say is that this gentleman and each and every person on your roster was very lucky during this time of fell circumstance, the fell clutch of circumstance. Genevieve, thank you. So we'll be going off to our dreams with those final words, those beautiful words. And before we go, I just want to thank all of the storytellers, Genevieve included for her story about the fell clutch of circumstance, and of course, Katie, who took us around the world in 6 minutes, and Vicky, who taught us or reminded us how our pets really ground us. And of course, Ed reminded us of the dangers in a marketplace, the pickpockets. And Mary, that was a wonderful story about so many of us, silly people. And Lori, your adorable routine, collecting pennies. I'll think of you every time I find one now, even if it's face down. And finally, Sharon, who told us, who started the whole evening off with voting animals. We've had a lot of different stories tonight and lots of different tones and feelings. There's been a lot of excitement and beauty. And what better way to spend a Tuesday, an early Tuesday in September. So thank you all. I see, are there any other announcements, Katie and Meg?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
No, I don't think there are any more announcements. Thank you again, Brandon, for just the wonderful emceeing. Thank you, Sharon, because you're writing up the stories for the swap summary. Thank you for the website. Thank you for Meg for all you do and for being the birthday girl, being so special. And we really love everything you do. Thank you. Thank you, Mary, for being with us and telling a story. It was awesome.
Yes,
All
happy
the wonderful
birthday, Meg.
tales. Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful, everybody. So we'll be seeing each other the second Tuesday in October. I expect there will be some spooky stories.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
Can I
everyone.
make a quick announcement?
Yeah.
Do tell in November we're having paired celebrations with Northern and Southern California groups, and Do Tell is with Meg, I think, is organizing with a group.
And Katie.
With a Southern California group. So look forward to that. I'm sure you'll hear more about that.
Yep.
Right.
Plan to put that up on the website as soon as we get more details worked out with our Southern California partner. But as many of you know, we've done Celebration for many years, and this opportunity to join up with the Southern California group, as we did last year with Inland Storytellers, was just a great experience. So more details to come as we all get this together. And thank you, Ed, for all of the work you're putting into getting this together, which, as I said in one of my emails to you, it's like herding cats. Yes, it is, but we will get it done. So thanks, Ed, for your efforts too.
All right. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Be well, everyone.
Yeah, you too. So we'll leave.
Thank you, Brandon.
Thank you. Good night, everyone. I'm going
Good
to
night.
close the room now. Good night.
Thanks so
Okay.
much, Brandon, and everybody. The stories are so good to have right now.
You
Yeah.
were wonderful. Thank you all for coming, and good
Okay.
night.
Good night.
Good night.
And
Night.